Richard. Thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
First and foremost, always thank the person who is going through all the work to put out a podcast. So thank you, Courtney, for the time that we're spending together today. I am Richard Skorupski. I am a retired U.S. Navy chief. I moved to South Dakota in 2004 because I wanted to get away from the rat race and get away from the hustle and bustle of the Eastern Seaboard. When I did, I realized that I absolutely fell in love with South Dakota and rural America, and I started writing. So, yeah, I started as a Navy chief. I got out of that. I went into the boat business for 10 years. I got out of the boat business, came out here, and started writing. And you have to write about what you love. If you try to write about something you don't love, it always comes out phony. People can see that it's forced. But if you love something and you write about it, be it fiction or be it nonfiction, you're going to attract an audience because you're writing about what you love. So that's a little bit about me. I am retired, very retired now, and enjoying my life in rural America. I'm in South Dakota, which isn't far from you, and just love putting my hands on the keyboard and telling the story of rural America.
Love that so much. I would love if you could tell us what your books are about.
I've always wanted to write a book. In fact, I had tried before I moved here, I tried 3 different times. I had this great whodunit, a really good whodunit. I had the characters built up. I had everything going. I had the dead guy. I had all of the different clues and hints. And I got 60 something pages into it when I realized I've written an alibi for every character and I couldn't figure out who done it. So that was the end of the whodunit. Then I started writing something kind of in the vein of Tom Clancy, Cold War stuff, because I did that with the Navy and I kind of leaned on that. And I did one of those, and then the Cold War ended. Nobody wanted to read about the Cold War anymore. So that book only got 100 pages done. And I did this 3 times before I moved here. And then I go back to my default position. You have to write about what you love. I love rural America and I wanted to write about it, but I was not raised here. So I couldn't write anything nonfiction. I couldn't write a documentary. I'd only been here a year. So I couldn't really write about a documentary about rural America. And I couldn't write history because I didn't go to school here. I don't know the history of South Dakota, not like I would if I had gone to school here. So I had to write fiction. So I created in my mind an imaginary town that I call Helen, South Dakota. Now, for those of you folks that are not familiar with South Dakota has a Henry, a Howard, and a Hazel. I figured they could have a Helen too. Helen is a town of about 300 people, plus or minus. And I write nice stories about nice people revolving around Helen. All of my stories revolve around Helen, whether it's past, whether it's future, whether it's now, it's always somewhere related to Helen, South Dakota. And that's where my stories are. I wrote my first one. I called it Flyover County, which is a play on words. And I started telling a story of mommy, daddy, and 2 kids who were living on the Eastern Seaboard and getting beat up by the economy. And they finally, through circumstances, they started looking for a better place to be. And I'm not going to talk a lot. I'm not going to spoil any of my plots just because I want people to buy my books. But that's where that starts. I wrote that one first, and then from that one, I wrote the Fred Weber story. Fred Weber is the brother of the main character in Flyover County, which is Bill Weber, and I tell that story. And at that point, I went back and wrote a prequel, which I called Tom and Sarah, the beginning. That makes Tom and Sarah, Flyover County, and Fred Weber a hard series. I mean, they will stand independently, but it's really good if you start at the first one and just keep going. Tom and Sarah, Tom was he's a major mover in a big construction company on the Eastern Seaboard, and his wife was a purchaser for a major department store. And over a matter of a couple of months, their entire world fell apart. Tom's company went broke. Sarah was downsized out of a job in a merger. All of a sudden, she didn't have a job. And they went basically from the penthouse to the outhouse in a matter of months. They're starting to struggle. They're starting to use savings to make ends meet. And then they get a call from their great aunt. And she says, Tommy, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your grandfather has passed away. And their entire life changed at that point because Tom wanted to go to the funeral. Sarah didn't want to spend the money. Another argument happens over money, and that's where Tom and Sarah goes. But all in all, Tom and Sarah is stress-free reading. The first couple of, the first chapter is a little rocky, but after that, you start seeing the greatness of what rural America is and what small town America is and what people do for one another and how they interact. And that's the stories that I write. I wrote that. Then I had some fun. I came up with a character called Frank Stanbauer. Frank is 97 years young at the beginning of his book. And I tell his life story through flashbacks, through recollections, through the things that he remembers and does, but I do it all in real time. He's at the high school and they have a happy birthday cake for him. And the lady's picking on him, says, Frank, can you blow out 97 candles? And he says, what do you think I am, a politician? I'm not that kind of a blowhard. She said, no, I just put a 9 and a 7 on it. He says, well, that I can do. And the kids are talking to him about when he was young, and he's talking about taking the train to Aberdeen, South Dakota, and going to the record store and going to the movies, and making sure they get back to the train station on time because the train only goes once a day and they had to catch it back. And after he leaves that, he's in his golf cart, which goes most towns like to have golf carts instead of cars. But he stops and he looks at the ball field and he looks to the left and he looks to the right and he sees the straight line of where the railroad tracks used to be. And he's thinking, how can these kids not see that there was a railroad here? So then he does the flashback where he's riding on the train and he's talking to Rose, which is his heartthrob, and his brother Billy is with him, and they're going to the record store and they're talking to the man who runs the record store. And like he told the kids back then, they would let you listen to a record before you would buy it. And he was telling the kids that sometimes we get away with listening to 5 or 6 songs before the manager says, buy something or get out. So, but all of this he does that takes up 1,000 words as he recalls that. And we just go through these things, and I go through his entire life that way. And because I write nice stories about nice people, you could see that I would start a story of a man who was 97 years old. It would have a natural ending. I couldn't write it. I couldn't write it that way. So it has a very nice ending. From there, I decided to write a book of short stories. I know that folks on the Northern Plains know about the blizzard, the children's blizzard of 1925 or 1988. Folks around here from Nebraska all the way through North Dakota, everybody knows about the blizzard of 1888. I have a book on my bookshelf over my shoulder that is called Prairie Echoes. Prairie Echoes it's a nonfiction. It was written by a reporter in the 1960s. And what he did is he went and he interviewed people who lived through that blizzard. So he has firsthand information in this book. And I devoured that book. And then I took the entire thing and moved it to 1925 and wrote a story about it. I had a newspaper man gets a bulletin saying there's a storm coming. He's looking outside. It's a bright, sunny January day. It's almost 35 degrees. He's saying there's a storm coming. This is the warmest day we've had since before Thanksgiving. These people are crazy. But he has to look into it because he's a newspaper man and he gets it verified. And now he's running all over town saying there's a storm coming. There's a storm coming. Everybody's telling him he's nuts. So that's that story. And then I have different characters that are built into that. There are about 5 different sub stories with Harry Waller talking to people, but there are other people and other characters. There's a school marm who is there the first winter from Missouri, and she's never seen this kind of a storm. So I run through what her emotions are and what do we do with the kids? Do I send them home? Do I put them out in this, or do I keep them all here where they're, and then we're running out of coal. How are we going to keep them warm? And all of these things are going on in that. The good part of that is a fast-moving story. The bad part of that, it's only 66 pages. I can't sell a 66-page book. I couldn't sleep at night. So I wrote 11 other short stories to go with it. So that's my book called Whiteout and Other Stories. From there, I took a story. All of my stories are people who are, my first three are people who are, and even Sadie's Way, which I'll get to, are all people who came from a big megalopolis area or from heavy suburbs and moved to a small town. And it's a story of culture shock and of fun. And it's, what do you mean you didn't lock your car? And, it's those kind of things. But then when I did River of Destiny, I did it the other way. I took a young man who graduated high school. He lived on a farm outside of course, Helen, South Dakota. And I plunked him down in the middle of downtown Philadelphia at Drexel University. And I started telling the culture shock the other way. And to give you a taste of this, he's in his car. He's driving east to go to college. He's got the car loaded to the gills with all the stuff he's going to taking to school. And he stops in Iowa, and there is a Flying J restaurant, or a Flying J travel center around Waterloo, Iowa. A place really exists. And he stops there and he goes in to get a sandwich and something to drink. And he comes back out, and there's an older man with a beard standing next to his car. And he walks up, he says, "Can I help you, sir?" And the man says, "Well, actually, son, it's me that's helping you." And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "I saw the South Dakota plates, and I know from those plates you're from a rural county. And I thought, just for grins, I better look inside. And sure enough, you have your keys hanging in the ignition." And I was just, and there are some people here around Waterloo, Iowa that might want to take advantage of that. And I just figured I'd stand here until you got back with your pop and your sandwich. And he thanks him very much. He says, "Oh, I didn't realize. I'll try to remember to take the key with me when I get out of the car from now on." He said, "You'd be wise to do that." Gets in the car and he drives away. And this man looks at the ground. He shakes his head. He says he's not going to have that car for a week in Philadelphia. And that's how that one goes. And that one is that's a cozy romance, because I got involved in cozy romance. What Frank Standauer, believe it or not, winds up being a cozy romance. But what do I mean by cozy? It's rated G. At the very minute, it's rated hard G. It's like a 1950s movie. As soon as things get interesting, you fade to black. You start end the chapter, go to the next. That's what I write. But that is the story of Justin and Natalie and the girl that he meets in Delaware. And that cascades into a cozy romance. And again, it talks about rural America. He had a family crisis that brought him home. And he has to deal with the family crisis and how his friends and neighbors helped with that. From there, I went to Sadie's Way. I wrote Sadie's Way in the middle of 2020. And most of my stories take a year to do. I go at least a year. The one I'm working on now has been 2 years. I wrote Sadie's Way in 4 months. And I honestly believe it's because I had some kind of connection upstairs. I really do, because what I wrote a story about a young lady. Imagine this. I'm going to tell you a little story. Imagine this. You're 17 years old. You're on the East Coast. You're in a fairly large town. You're looking forward to the prom next week. Graduation is coming up in another month. You've got a boyfriend. You pretty much picked out which college you're going to go to. You've got all the applications in. Everything's really set. You're just smiling and loving life. And then your father comes, and then you find out that your mother and your little brother are killed in an automobile accident. And while you're back on your heels from that, your father, who you barely know, because he's just the guy that goes to work and makes money, and comes home, he's that guy, comes up and says, "It wasn't an accident. And the agents are here to take us away." And they even took our phone. So here you are, you're 17, you don't even have your phone, and they take you out of your house. You're not allowed to talk to your boyfriend, not allowed to tell anybody anything, no contact. You're picked up and plunked down somewhere else. And that's how Sadie's Way starts. And needless to say, because it's what I do, I plunk them down in a house 1 mile out of where? Helen, South Dakota. And again, let the culture shock begin. And that's that story. And how does the 17-year-old young lady adjust to rural America? The first thing she had this one girl that was very nice to her, and immediately her warning signs go up. Why is she being nice to me? What does she want? She's trying to get over on me somehow. But just the New Jersey state of mind. You don't, if somebody smiles at you, they want something. And that's where how she approached this. So she had a lot to learn. But I had fun with Sadie's Way. And I will tell you, even, and I'm going to almost violate a rule, but I tell the entire gospel message in Sadie's Way in such a way that someone who has never heard it would see it. And I don't beat it to death. It's just interwoven in. And I think that's why it only took me 4 months to write Sadie's Way. I love Sadie's Way. It's one of my favorites. It's not my youngest, but it's still my favorite. After Sadie's Way, and after 2020, I decided I didn't want to write anything about a pandemic. I didn't want to write anything about lockdowns. I didn't want to write anything about the stuff that happened during that year. So I went to historical fiction. I had fun with it with Frank Stanbauer. I had fun with it with my other stories and with Whiteout. So I wrote Amber Waves. Amber Waves is a story of a young lady who wants to crash. This is 1977. And to help date that, that's when the first Star Wars movie came out. 1977. In fact, in the movie, I let him go to the movies and watch Star Wars. But that's the year the first Star Wars movie came out. And this is a young lady whose father owns a custom harvesting service. And for folks that don't know what that is, they travel from Texas to North Dakota harvesting wheat as the wheat gets ready to be harvested. They start in April and they end in September. And they just keep going, and it's what they do for a living. Well, Karen, and it's a name that I chose before Karen became a really bad name to have, and I'm not going to change it now because I wrote it then. But Karen wants to break the glass ceiling. She wants to take over her dad's business. And in 1977, farming was a man's world. You know, the women were supposed to make lunch and bring it out to the field. You know, they weren't involved in the ins and outs and the finances of custom harvesting or any business, but she wanted to be able to take over that business when her father decided to retire, which wasn't going to be anytime soon, 10, 15 years down the road. So she talked her father, when she graduated high school, she talked her father into going one full harvest season before she started college. And everything is hunky-dory until this guy by the name of Roger shows up. Now, Roger he did 4 years in the Navy. He did a couple of years as a heavy equipment operator in Florida, helping build runways and things like that. But he's working temporary jobs. That's what he does. His goal is to make enough money to buy a quarter section of land and then rent that land and go back to work and let that quarter section buy the next one, buy the next one, buy the next one. And he intended to be a land baron, just retire at about the age of 50. That was his goal. And to do that, he was very frugal. He kept his money in his pocket. He didn't go out to the taverns on Saturday night and blow it. He stayed home. He read books and he kept every nickel because he wanted that quarter of land, that first one. Karen and Roger were the only two people on this custom harvest crew under the age of 50. And they're both in their 20s. Well, Karen's 18, he's 23. And so of course, when Roger shows up, you know, the dad comes over to him and he gets this "stay away from my daughter" speech, you know, and you know how well that worked out because they're together every day for hours and hours at a time and every evening. So again, it's another cozy romance, but I think folks will enjoy taking a step back and looking at life a little simpler. And there's some drama, there's some this and that, but I'm not going to spoil any of the stories. But that's what I write. I write nice stories about nice people in rural America, showing the culture of rural America and how you can go to the store and leave your keys hanging in the ignition. And nobody will say boo. Nobody will say a word. It's just the way things are. I know people that live around me that could not tell me where their house keys are. They don't have a clue. They don't even know if they found them. They wouldn't even know if they worked. I have a friend of mine who lived in rural Iowa, who I took that old man character out of. He bought a pickup truck from a guy that was a John Deere dealer service manager. And the pickup was 20 years old and he bought it. And when he got it home, he realized that the ignition key was frozen in place and you couldn't take it out because they had never done it, you know. But that's the kind of stuff I like to write. You know, in Flyover County, Bill Weber, he's got his wife and he's got his two kids, and they're going to check into the Helen Motel. So he finds that he has the key, the old-fashioned plastic key fobs, and he finds rooms 8 and 9. He goes over to the office to go in and to check in, and there's nobody there. The door is open, but there's nobody there, and he hollers, and there's nobody there. But there's a note, if you need me, pick up the phone and dial this 4-digit number. So he looks at that and he dials, and the woman answers, and he says, well, this is Bill Weber. I want to check in. And she says, well, don't you already have your key? And he says, well, yes, we do. Well, I'll see you in the morning then. So he goes over. Now this is the fun part. He walks over to the door. He opens the door with the key, reaches in, flips the switch, and the television comes on. And he kind of chuckles and he feels around. He finds another switch and the ceiling light comes on. Okay, so he gets his wife in. And then he turns around and he gets the kids. They're going in the room next door with an adjoining door. But he has them inside, and then he goes back to the car and he grabs some luggage and he sets it down. He locks the car, brings the luggage in, puts it down, comes back out, unlocks the car, gets the next 2 suitcases, locks the car, brings that in. And this is just a normal thing for somebody that's from Fairview. And Fairview is an imaginary town I made up to give him a place to come from, which is somewhere in that megalopolis club between Philadelphia and Baltimore. And I don't really ever say what state it's in, which allows me to have a little artistic license when I talk about rules and regulations and the like. But those are the kind of fun things I write about. I just enjoy bragging about rural America, and I can do it in fiction better than I can do it in any other way. So that was my short answer to your question.
Love that so much. What inspired you to write your books?
Again, like I said, I always wanted to write. I always wanted to write, and I never could get any traction. But again, when I got out here, I love it here. And I had to tell that story. I had to tell the story. I couldn't tell the story in any other way than to write it in fiction. And I enjoy putting my fingers on the keyboard, watching the movie, and typing feverishly. It's just fun. And there have been times I've pushed away from the keyboard and I'll chuckle and say, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. Yeah, it's just, I love writing the story of rural America. I love the people here. There is a culture here that exists that does not exist on either coast anymore. And it's a shame. But I knew the gentleman who was part of the governor's chief of staff about 15 years ago. And I told him, and this is going to go to someone, you have to be over the age of 50 to understand this joke. I told Dusty Johnson that they should put up a billboard coming out of Minnesota on Interstate 90, put up a big billboard as they enter the state. And he said, well, what do you want the billboard to say? I said, I think it should say, welcome to South Dakota. June Cleaver still lives here. And if you're not over the age of 50, you don't get that. But that's from the old Leave It to Beaver show. Because it's that culture is still here. People care about people. People go out of their way to care about people. You move into a small town in South Dakota or North Dakota for that matter, or even Nebraska, or down in Oklahoma. If you want to be sociable, people will be sociable. If you want to be left alone, people are going to leave you alone. If you want to be sociable, you find out where the coffee clutch is, because every small town has one. Doesn't matter what town you're in, there's coffee somewhere. And you go there and you go in the morning and you introduce yourself. And I do a lot of stuff with the coffee clutch in Helen. A lot of things happen. It's like when they were getting ready to put up the Christmas decorations. And they're talking about, well, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. Yeah, and I'm going to put up the angels. And the mayor says, no, they're not angels. We can't have angels. We can't have angels. That's a religious symbol. He says, well, what are these? I said, they're winter fairies. He says, but they're playing horns. What so? Winter fairies can play horns. Yeah, it's just fun stuff. But a lot of happens around the coffee clutches. But if you want to be a part of a community, you got to be a part of the community. You go to the coffee clutch, you go to the local church, you make yourself public. There is a story, and I'm going to tell this, and it's not in my books. It's something that actually happened in a small town not far from here. There were 2 kids that came over from Minneapolis, and they moved into this town and they set up a meth lab. And they made 2 mistakes not knowing about rural America. One, they never said hello to anybody. They never talked to anybody. They would go in, they would buy gas, they would pay for the gas, and they would leave. They never went to the morning coffee clutch. They never went to church. They never became part of the community. And so one day, this young boy that's delivering papers goes by, and feels that's just a funny smell coming out of this place. So he tells his dad. His dad smells it and just walks by, and you can smell this odor coming out of this. So he calls the sheriff and says, "You might want to check on these people. One of them might be dead." Well, the sheriff goes over and busts the place for a meth lab. Now, why is that story important? Because if the kids understood rural America, they would have gone to morning coffee, and they would have been around, and they would have stopped to chat at the gas station, and they would have gone out to the local bar at night and knocked back a few beers with the neighbors. Then if the kid said, "Dad, there's a funny smell," Dad would pick up the phone and say, "Hey, you guys all right? We got a funny smell coming out of that house." And they could say, "Oh yeah, we're fine." And they could be out of there before the sheriff showed up. They didn't understand rural America. And that's those kind of things you just don't see. I love writing about rural America.
Love
What other
that.
questions can I answer?
When you were writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
My wife has told me that my fan base is women over the age of 50. And I think that's funny because Sadie's Way is about a 17-year-old girl, but it seems to work that way. When I write these stories, I bet I'm not, until she told me that, I really didn't think. I was thinking more of a general men and women that in their 30s or 40s or even early 50s. But she pointed it out to me, and she said, "Well," I said, "Why do you think that?" She says, "Look at your book signings and look who shows up." And she's right. She's right. That's my fan base. And so what she does, and I'm going to do this, you can see this, but other people can't. I'm going to explain what I'm doing. I have a fedora. For those people under the age of 50, that's a hat. And she makes me wear this fedora when I go to book signings. And people say, "Well, why are you wearing that?" And I say, "So my head doesn't get too big. It kind of holds everything in." But it seems that that's where my fan base is. My fan base is people over 50 and more women than men. And that's just fun. And so I really don't write to anybody when I'm writing a story. I'm just writing the story. And it's like the one that, and I'm going to say this in past tense, that came out on July 1st this last summer. That's set in 1930, because again, I love historical fiction. And 1930 is a fun place to write about. And again, I wasn't thinking, I was starting at that point to think about where my fan base was, and I was writing a little bit more to the fan base. But 1930 is an amazing period of time. It's right after the 1920s and right after the stock market crash, but before the drought. The dirty 30s, as it's known up here. The Great Depression happened, and the major drought happened at the same time. And it basically devastated the American farmer in the Midwest. Many, many, many farmers lost their way, lost their farms, lost it all. But where I'm writing is before that, but after the stock market crash. That's a window that's about a quarter of an inch wide. And trying to find information about that little tiny window. There's volumes about the roaring 20s. And there's volumes about what happened in the 30s and the stock market crash and the drought and the black blizzards and all. There's that little tiny window called 1930 and 1931, where the stock market crashed. It affected things a little bit for the farmers, but they could still sell wheat. And that's where my book, Becoming One, is set. That I had a lot of fun with that. That's a marriage of convenience. Delia had a son by the name of Oscar, and she had a farm, and she lost her husband. Peter worked in Akron, Ohio at the Goodyear rubber plant. And he lost his wife in the same epidemic. He lost his wife to influenza. And he's looking at that, and he writes her a letter. And this letter is actually in whiteout, because it's a short story in whiteout about this man who actually mails his sister-in-law a letter saying, "You have a child and a farm you can't take care of by yourself. I have no job because I just was laid off from the Akron tire plant. And I have two daughters that need a woman's touch and need a mother's touch. And what I am proposing," and he puts in parentheses, and proposing is the right word, "is that we combine our assets and we combine our forces and raise this family as one." And that's the beginning of my story. becoming one. And I tell that story. That story, again, I lead it in the Whiteout short story book, but that book opens with Delia standing on the train station, waiting for Peter to get off with the girls. And I take them through the blending that happens that, and again, it's a marriage of convenience. They don't plan. There's no love there. There's just, they have to do what they have to do. And I let that grow into a cozy romance. It's basically a second chance romance. And I enjoyed the heck out of the writing. But the amount of homework I had to do about, right? In 1936, you couldn't give a cow away. In 1928, you were getting great money for it. In 1928, you were getting $1.50 a bushel for corn. In 1936, you couldn't get anything, or not for corn, for wheat. In 1936, if you had any wheat, maybe you get 30 cents. So but what happened in 1930? What happened in that little tiny gap where after the stock market crashed and before the dirty thirds, before the drought? And it took me 3 weeks to find out how much a cow sold for in 1930. I just had to keep digging and keep calling people and talking to people. I finally went to the Department of Agriculture. Believe it or not, the Department of Agriculture actually has a census. They cows, they do dirt, they do chickens. They actually have this. And I found the 1930 census, and then I had to do all the math, because if they don't give you the individual, you have to find out how many cows there are, how many cows sold for how much money, and on ad nauseum. It took me a while. Come to find out that a cow in 1930 sells for between $7 and $9 a 100 pound. And that, and you remember from then, with inflation, it's times 20. So, and even that, it's cheap. It's 140 to $180 a 100 pounds. So, and that's still less than we're paying for beef today. But anyway, that's becoming one. And that's a really fun story to write. And again, I think as I go along, I'm going to stay in the past. I'm going to stay with historical fiction because it's fun. And it tells the story of the people of the Northern Plains. It tells the story of respect for property, for respect for one another. And when we first moved here, my neighbor came over and we chatted for a few minutes. And as he left, he says, well, if you need anything, let me know. And I realized, because I'd spent some time with my friend in Iowa, I realized that what he meant is that if you need something, let me know. Instead of in New Jersey, that's just lip service. Because if you had something, you call them, they may not even answer the phone. But here, when somebody says, if you need something, let me know, I mean it. I just love writing that kind of stuff. So who do I write to and why? I have to tell the story. I mean, it's burning in me now. I have to tell the story. I have to show people who live in Maryland what they're missing. And I have to show people who live here what they're missing. People who live here don't know what they have. They have no idea. People who live in New York City don't go to the Statue of Liberty. People who live in Washington, D.C., don't go to the top of the Washington Monument and look out those little tiny windows. People who live in St. Louis don't go in the arch. People who live in rural America have no idea what they have. They don't realize that you don't have to lock your car to walk down to go to the mailbox 100 feet away. You don't have to lock your house if you're just going out for coffee. They don't realize the honesty, the forthrightness that still exists here. And I think the culture comes from the people who were raised here, and those parents and grandparents who went through the 1880s, went through the blizzard of 1888. They went through the dirty 30s, and they get to see those things. The people who are here are cut above, and I'm glad to be a part of them. I'm glad to be a transplant, and I'll never be one of them, but I'm glad to be a part of the community. And I rambled so long, I forgot your question.
Nope, that totally answered it. Thank you. How long have you been writing, and what made you really sit down and start?
Again, because I love it here. I started, we were on a trip, a round robin trip. My wife and I we went to Atlanta, Georgia to see grandkids, and then up to New Jersey to see other grandkids, and then back here, 4,800 miles in the car. And my wife and I are the type that we don't listen to the radio. We don't listen to talking books. We talk to each other. And we've always been that way. We're best friends. And we talk to each other. And somewhere along the line, I told her about my three failed attempts at writing the book. And she says, well, you should do it again. And I said, well, I might. So we both promised each other that we would write a book. I've written 9 novels. She's on page 3. But she is my cover artist. She does all of my covers. She does all the artwork. All I do is put the letters in it. And I love her for it. You know, I kind of give her an idea of the theme. She knows the story because I read it to her as I write it. Every time I finish a chapter, I'll read it to her. And she proofreads it for me also. So she knows the story. So she does the cover. But we've decided, and that was in 2009. And we decided that we were going to write a book. And that's when I started Flyover County. Flyover County took me 4 years. Because first I had to figure out what it was I was writing. And then I finally figured out that the best way to write a novel is to sit down, put your fingers on the keyboard and move them. And just let it flow. Watch the movie and type. And that's what I did with Flyover County. Flyover County it's and I have to say it's a big book. It's a long book. It's War and Peace. I mean, it's huge. It's 69 chapters. And each chapter is about 4,000 words. So I'm going along and I'm typing, and as one would do with a computer, you finish chapter 1, you file it, and you start a new file, and you do chapter 2, and you file it, you start a new chapter for 3, and for 4, for 5. I got all done, and I compiled it into one file, and I thought, oh my goodness, I've written 750,000 words. And I'm thinking, this thing's going to be huge. So I'm talking to a friend of mine and who's kind of in the business. He says, well, which chapters do you think you can cut out? And I looked at him, I said, which one of your children do you want to give up? And he kind of said, well, I see your point. I decided, okay, it's 2 inches thick. But each chapter is about 4,000 words. So it's about 10 pages. You can pretty much sit and read it in one sitting. And each chapter is pretty much a standalone short story. I do a chapter on Christmas. I do a chapter on Thanksgiving. Each chapter, because I take Bill and I take that family and I move them to Helen and I move them through an entire year of culture shock. I go through the spring, through the summer, through the fall, going to school, doing Halloween, doing trunk or treat. I'd never heard of trunk or treat before I moved to South Dakota, So, and it makes sense when you live out here. My nearest neighbor is a mile and a half away. If I wanted to take kids trick or treating around my neighborhood, it would take me all night, and they'd only stop at 4 houses. Because when you stop, you got to have a cup of coffee, you got to say hello, you got to visit for a little while. That trunk or treat I thought was marvelous. So I did a whole chapter just on trunk or treat. And of course embellished it some more because Bill was with his son Corey, and he's taking around June, who happens to be his wife, is also a nurse. So she had her own little nurse's station set up in the corner. And so it was just Bill and the boy went around doing trunk or treat. That was a whole fun story. Again, it shows the culture. It shows what life is like here in a small town. And so my first story I wrote, it was published first in 2012. And I looked at it and I said, and this is back when self-publishing was about an inch tall. And there wasn't a lot going on with it. And I had to do a lot of homework. I did the ebook first. And I used free software on a free book called Smashwords. And I used that to compile and to format and to get the insights and the nuances I needed to make an ebook. And then once I had the ebook and I had it published out through Amazon, then I did the print book. And self-publishing at the time was challenging. We didn't have the tools that we have today. We didn't have Grammarly. We didn't have some of the other things, Atticus, and some of the other things that are out there that are magnificent. So I did it all. There are 2 things you can do in self-publishing. You either do it yourself or you pay someone. And I wasn't in a position to start paying people thousands of dollars to create covers, to format, to edit for this and that. I will not lie to you. When I put Flyover County out for public purchase, my entire investment at that moment was $10.60. I published Flyover County for under $11 because I did it all through Amazon. I changed my own oil. I did all of it myself. I learned how to format. I learned how to do things. And that's how I made Flyover County work. 2 years later, I turned around and did a revision because I found a whole lot of typos and things. It was when I went back and looked at it after I'd done a couple other books and had a little experience under my belt. I said, "Boy, this is junk. So I got to fix it." And now looking at it even again today, I need to do another revision because I'm Grammarly's finding things that I didn't see. But that was how I started. I started with that when it came out, and I started in 2009. It published in 2012. And then it took me about a year after that to write Fred Weber, and then a year to write Tom and Sarah. And it's been about a year, except Becoming One, which took me 2, and Sadie's Way, which took me 4 months. So that's where the first book came from. And I just stayed in the theme. Everything revolves around Helen. I don't care if it's Helen in 1930 or Helen in 2025 or 2035 or 2045. I've got one story in the other stories of Whiteout called Generations, and it starts with a man and a boy, and they're on a buckboard, and they're taking their wheat to the elevator, and the boy says, "You know, Dad, we ought to get it. We ought to get one of those new Model T Ford trucks." And the dad says, "Why? These 2 horses work just fine." And they say, "Well, okay." And they have an argument, and then there's another argument a little later. "We got to get rid of these oxen, and we got to get a tractor." "Dad, we need a tractor." "Why? We don't need a tractor. These horses pull just fine. These oxen pull just fine." "Yeah, but the tractor, you don't have to feed it when it's not moving." And the dad looks at it and says, "Don't be pertinent." And I take that conversation. Yeah, we got to buy a tractor, then we got to buy a truck, and then we need to get a combine with an enclosed cab, and then we need to get a semi, and then we need to get auto steer, and then we need to get, and I take it all the way into the 2050s, where the last argument is the dad is sitting in his office and he's watching 6 different screens with drones flying, and he's watching the combines work by themselves autonomously, filling up and going and filling up the truck, which then self-drives itself to the elevator. And he's having an argument with his daughter about upgrading the software. We really need to get this new thing called Gwendolyn. And I use the exact same phraseology through the entire thing. Don't be impertinent. All of the same words, but each time, and I call it Generations. And it was a fun story to write.
Love
Okay, where
that.
are we?
You're good. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
Prior to recent events with my wife being sick, we have a great system. I am an early riser, very early riser. I get up between 5 and 6. But Cheryl, on the other hand, is a night owl. So she doesn't go to sleep till 3 or 4. So I have a period of time from about 6 a.m. to maybe 10 or 10:30. That's mine. And that's when I write. That's when I write. That's when I do my homework. That's when I look at advertising. That's when I look at different things. I'm looking up stuff for the next story. That's my time to be an author. And then Cheryl wakes up and she calls upstairs and she's to my den and she says, "Good morning." And I say, "Good morning." And then we go down and have breakfast. And then we spend the day doing whatever it is we're doing. And then about 10 o'clock, which is just about the end of the 10 o'clock, 10:30, when the news is over, which if you're in Central Time, that happens at 10 o'clock. I say goodnight and I go to bed. And then she's got her time from 10 o'clock, 10:30 until 2 or 3 or 4, whenever she goes to bed. And it works out well. We're in the same house 24 hours a day, but we only see each other in the middle block. So my writing time is normally in the morning when
Love,
the coffee is fresh.
love that. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
I don't use music. I don't. I don't have any. The only thing I have around me is the mess that I call notes. But I don't have distractions. I keep the phone away from me. I don't answer. I'll answer the phone if it rings, but I'm not going to have it in front of me looking at every little pop-up that shows up what's selling in Dollar General. I keep it aside. And the only thing I look at is my keyboard and the screen. And a lot of times when I'm in the zone, I don't even look at the screen. I just type. And I tell people I type at 25 mistakes a minute, and it's pretty close. But when I'm in the zone, I don't care what it looks like. I want to get the story. I want to get the story down. I want to get the story to a conclusion point, and then I'll look up at the screen and try to figure out what it was I wrote. So that's what I do. I zone. I tunnel vision I tunnel vision the keyboard and the computer screen in front of me, and I try to avoid any distractions. And every now and again, life is life, and all of a sudden you get a barking dog, and you got to go let the dog out. But that's life is life. And you do what you do. But that's my time to write. I don't write in afternoons, or I don't write in evenings. I might do business stuff in an afternoon or an evening if I'm working on a new ad, or if I'm working on arranging things like this podcast. I will do that later on in the day. But if I'm writing a story, that happens in the morning.
Love that. What is your favorite writing snack and drink?
Coffee. That's all. Coffee.
Love it.
Coffee with coffee in it. It's just, that's all. I don't snack while I'm writing. It just, it's never occurred to me, and it's a distraction. I need that hand to type. So
Love it. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
I try to read inside my genre. And I also, I grew up, I cut my teeth on science fiction when I was a teenager. I think every boy did, especially in the 60s. Everybody loved Robert Heinlein, um, Isaac Asimov, and all of that great stuff that happened that they wrote back in the 60s. But when I got in the Navy, of course, then I started reading international intrigue, Tom Clancy stuff. And when I started writing about Helen, I switched and I started reading more inside the genre of rural and small town stories. No, I have never bit the bullet and read Miss Laura Ingalls, but uh, I haven't gotten that far down this road. But I do read a lot of stuff uh, that is purely in genre. I find myself, I watch Hallmark movies. Yes, I'm one of those. I'm a sucker for a happy ending. And I read the stuff that has happy endings. I read the things that are, if I'm reading a book and I don't like it, I don't like the antagonist, I'll stop reading. I won't read anymore. I don't like that guy. I don't care. I don't like how he thinks. I really don't want to know him. But if I stay with nice stories about nice people, I'll read all day long. There are certain authors that are out there that are wonderful that way. Marie, I can't remember her name, Laura Schulte or something like that. She writes a lot of nice stories. One of my favorites was Growing Season. And again, it's small town. It's not a romance. It's just about a young lady that moved out of the city for a few months to to watch over a farmstead for a gentleman who had been hurt or gotten old and was in a nursing home for a few months. And she was there to take care of, to help take care of his garden, take care of the dog, things like that. It's a really nice story about nice people, and then there are other ones that are like that. There are other authors. Grace Clemens does some stuff like that. And I enjoy reading that. And not to steal their stuff or anything like that. And I honestly don't think that's the other thing I tell people who are looking to write books. I tell them that, come on in, the water's fine. And then everybody's freaking out about AI right now, but there are a lot more people who read than there are who write. There's no such thing as competition in what I do. If somebody likes cozy romance in a rural America setting, they're going to like what I write. They're also going to like what other people write, but that's not going to take away from me, because if they like it, they're going to read both. And that's, so I don't have a problem with competition. I encourage it. When I see somebody getting started, I send them emails, I send them tips and hints, and try to move them along and help them. When I hear of an event, for instance, Aberdeen, South Dakota has an author event every year, I blast it out on my email for all of the people that I know are writers. Come on, let's go up and sign some books. It's fun. It's a hobby that pays me a little bit of money, but I have a heck of a good time doing it.
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Clancy, believe it or not, Tom Clancy was the one that I love his style. And I don't write in his style, but I loved his style growing up. And I loved how he did it. I also, Heinlein was, again, he's science fiction. I never wrote science fiction because I don't have the imagination that goes that way. And again, you've got to write about what you love. So I'm not going to force something. So yeah, Tom Clancy had a way of doing things. And actually it wasn't Red October. It was actually the one that came out right after that. And then the name of it eludes me right now, but it was a tremendous story. And I liked it because I do what he does, in that when I'm telling a story on three different levels of four different people all at the same time going on. And I'll jump to this story for a while and I'll get that to a conclusion. I'll jump over here to the next story and tell them something and tell something about that. And becoming one, I'll have a whole story where Delia is talking to Virginia, the oldest daughter, and they're baking bread, and she's talking about how to bake bread, and they're talking about different things that girls talk about. And then I use my typical three asterisks dot dot dot, and I'm out there with Peter on the tractor, and he's planting the wheat, and he's talking with his neighbor who's trying to show him how the planter works, and I do that and dot dot dot. Here's Oscar playing with the dog in the yard, and I love that jump around kind of stuff. But you have to do it with some kind of continuity, otherwise the people just get lost. I did it first with Frank Stanbauer because I kept doing these flashbacks. Here he is. He's sitting in a restaurant and eating supper, and he's talking to a gentleman, and he says, "Well, do you know how your father got here?" And he says, "Dad, I know he moved here right after World War II." And he says, "Well, let me tell you a story." And then I do a whole full 2-chapter cutaway on Mike Finney's dad and how he got here and how they got together and they had to go find a lost school bus right after a blizzard. The blizzard ended, but the school bus never got back to the school, and they couldn't figure out. They had to go find it, and that's a whole story of that. Of course, that's a flashback, and he's talking about writing in the dot 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 back to current day. And I love that. I love that style. And as long as you don't stay in one place too long, people don't get bored with it.
Love that. What books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
Robert Heinlein, which some people pronounce Heinlein. I don't know. I never met the man, but I've always called him Heinlein. I read everything he wrote. He wrote over 60 books. It was all science fiction. And I went from that to Isaac Asimov. I read everything science fiction when I was a boy, almost, well, to the exclusion of doing my homework. I just, that's what I did. And it cost me. My school grades would probably have been a lot better if I hadn't gotten sucked into some of these stories. But yeah, those were the ones that did it growing up. And again, as I got older, then it kind of morphed into international intrigue and Cold War and all of those things. Because at the time I was living in the middle of it. That's part of my job in the Navy. But and again, as years go by, that changes again too. So I think
Love
as you age, you change your likings. You know,
love that. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
again, I like a lot of Grace Clemens, but she has been very prolific lately. She's writing a lot of stuff that's almost novellas and real short, and I read them. Uh, I like Marie Lara. I can't pronounce her name. It's a Lara Schulte or something like that. I If I see her coming out with a new book, I read that. I also read a lot of. I've read a couple of Marie Force, but that's only because I know her husband. And Marie Force is a wonderful lady, and Dan is a great guy. He's another retired Navy chief. And I've read a couple of things of Marie. She writes a little bit more edgy than I like to read, but that's okay. That's what she does, and she makes a fortune at it, so I shouldn't say anything. But so I jump for that too. I will read some of her stuff, not all of it. She's more prolific than I can afford. It's one of those. And there are others whose names just don't trip off the top of my head at the moment. But I try to stay in genre. Uh, I've been reading a lot of stuff that's 1880s, high plains. People establishing their first farms and getting their patent and trying to get that first quarter to be productive, etc. I'm reading some of the stuff that way because I'm thinking about maybe going there next. Or I may just do a follow on to Becoming One and take it into 1933 and the hellish life that people had between 33 and 35 on the Northern Plains, and then show the tenacity of the people and show how they just stuck it out. And they made do. You could use one piece of aluminum foil 14 different times. It's just the amazing, what they did. And I'd like to tell that story too, but I'd like to tell it in fiction again.
Amazing. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
Find a novel, first to find a book of short stories and figure out what you want. What interests you? Where do you want to go? Do you want a romance? Do you want a love story? Do you want, a Western? Do you want something that's high drama? You want something that's low drama? I happen to be a low drama kind of guy. Um, Go to your local library and talk to the librarian because she or he knows, or you can go to a local bookstore, but they're very few and far between anymore. I can only think of two within 100 miles of me. I don't know if there are any up around Fargo or Grand Forks, but it's not very common. But every town over a population of 1,000's got a library, and a lot of towns under have a library. Go talk to the librarian and say, I'm thinking about trying to read again. And I'm thinking about what kind of book should I read? And she or he is going to ask you questions and lead you in the right direction. And that's free advice. And I always like things that are free. But that's what I would tell people. I'm not going to say buy my book because I don't know what they like. If somebody wants science fiction, I'm not going to tell them to read Tom and Sarah. It's because I'm wasting their time and it's just not fair. So go to your local librarian. We have one in Redfield, which is my county seat. She's a wonderful lady. Right now, she's the president of the South Dakota Library Association, which is kind of cool. But if you were to walk up to her and say, I'm thinking about trying to, I've gotten away from reading since I've been an adult, and I've got these 4 children that are, occupying all of my time, but now they're in high school and they don't want me to bother them. What's a good book to start back in? And that's what I would suggest.
Love that. On the opposite side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
Put your fingers on the keyboard and move them. Bottom line, you're never going to write a story until you put your fingers on the keyboard and move them. If you don't know what to write, doesn't matter. Put your fingers on the keyboard. Something will come out, and it will be in the language that you speak. And then you go from there and just bang out a draft. It doesn't matter if it stinks. Bang out a draft. You can always modify it. You can always go back and change things later. You can go back, and I find myself when I'm doing revisions, I'm terrible at this. I'll change happy to glad, and then I'll take glad and I'll make it ecstatic, and then I don't like ecstatic because that's too big a word. And I'm back to happy again. I do that. I'm nuts with that. But if you're writing a story, sit down and write the story. I know there are people that outline and they make all of these grandiose things and stickers and all of this stuff, but none of that matters until you put your fingers on the keyboard and move them. Outlines mean nothing. Character development in a loose leaf binder means nothing until you sit down and start with Once Upon a Time. And if you're science fiction, in a land far, far away. But once if you sit down and you write the first chapter, I don't care how bad it is or how good it is. When you write the first chapter, you'll be hooked and you'll write the second. And that's how you do it. And that's what I tell people.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
That's curious. I don't know. That's a really curious question. I guess I don't know. There are certain things that I do that are rather strange, like for in the fall. And it's not strange if you live in South Dakota or North Dakota, but in the fall I drive a semi for the harvest for a neighbor. Because you live up by Grand Forks, that if it's September or October, you got to hide under a rock to not have a job during the harvest. And so people are surprised, I think, to find out that I've got a commercial driver's license and that I keep it current. In fact, I just got a new one the other day. I keep it current so that I can drive. I can go 65 miles an hour down the road hauling 85,000 pounds of truck and grain. And people look at my face, Rick, at your age? Yeah, well, at my age, yeah. And I was with a crew one time. They called me the kid. I was only 68, and the oldest guy was 93. He was driving a double. He was pulling 125,000 pounds down the road. 93 years old. God bless him. He was great. But I think that people would find that would be something that they would think is unusual from a retired Navy chief and a guy that spent 10 years in the recreational boating business. And now I drive a truck. So yeah, if I'm
Love that.
grasping for something, I think that would be it.
Love it. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
I think I have beat this poor cop subject to death, but I'm going to say it one more time. I love rural America. I love middle America, from the Mississippi River to the western border of the Louisiana Purchase states. And I'm talking, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and even parts of Texas. There is a culture here that does not exist on either coast anymore. There is a respect. If you're walking down the street in New York City and you make contact with somebody, it's a threat. And just for instance, if you say you're living in New York City, you're going to move from apartment A to apartment B, so you rent a truck, and you have to have three people. You have to have yourself, you have to have someone to help you carry the heavy stuff, and you have to have somebody to stay with the truck. Because if you don't have somebody to stay with the truck, you're going to take that first couch or chair out of the truck, you're going to take it to the apartment, you're going to come back, and either the truck is gone or it's going to be empty. That's just what it's like to live in New York City. People here don't know what they have. They don't know the culture that they have. People who have been raised here don't know what they have. Now, when I was in New York City and I would walk in the city, I used to keep my wallet in my front pocket. And every time I walked, I would slap that wallet with my thumb as I'm swinging my arm. That would give 1 second. That's all I had between me and a pickpocket. And I did that as a matter of course. And I found that most people did, because you can't trust your wallet in your back. When I was in New Jersey, I lived 17 miles from where I worked. It took me 45 minutes through 31 traffic lights to get there. And where I lived, they considered it country living, because everybody had a yard and a fence. I come out here and I can look across and I can watch the stars down to the horizon, and I can look across and watch the sunrise or watch the sunset, which I see both of them most days. It's just an amazing place to live. I have not heard a traffic report in 20 years. Whereas when I was back east, you lived by them. Well, this road's jammed up, I better take that one. Oh, that one's jammed up too, And I think the biggest thing is there is a culture here that is still here. June Cleaver still lives here, as I said earlier. This is a flashback to the 50s and early 60s. People are not naive and people are not ignorant. It's just a matter of looking at things is more honest. They're not out to get you. They're not out to sue you. Everybody, you go back east and everybody is sue happy because they're looking for that lottery ticket. And it's tough to live that way when everybody is your adversary. And I honestly think that people need space. They need space. And out here, we have space. We have plenty of space. We have room around. My nearest neighbor is 1.5 miles away. My nearest town is 16 miles away, and it has a population of 88. You go into New York City and people still need space. So they make that space in their head. And they build a wall around them to get that space that they need to survive, because otherwise everything is crowding in on them. And that's why you can walk down the streets of New York and never see a soul. And nobody will ever see you because they're in their space. And so that's the name of that tune. But that's, in a nutshell, that's what I want to say. Rural America is a place that I love, and I will live here until the day I'm not living anymore.
Where's the best place for readers to find your books? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option? And the best place to connect with you?
All of my books, ebook, printed books. Sadie's Way is also out on audio because Amazon did a test AI audio, and they selected certain authors to try it. And I did, and I put it out, and it's not bad. You can tell it's AI, but it's not, I am a computer and I am reading a book. It's not that bad, but some of the nuances that you would pick up as you're reading don't quite make it through the AI. And every time I listen to it, it's better. So it's learning, because that's what AI does. But everything I do is on Amazon. Everything, be it print, be it audio, be it ebook. Ebooks do real well. I do book signings. I do local presentations. I do local talks on my website, which is real easy to find, flyovercounty.com. I keep an update as to where I'm going to be and when. If people are looking for a signed copy, all they have to do is come see me. I'm at the state fair every other year because you're not allowed to go every year as a guest author. So I do that, and I keep people up that way. If somebody really wants a signed copy of my book, they can either call me. My numbers are on the website. They can text me. They can send me a note. I am available on Flyover County, author at flyovercounty.com, or I'm also on Flyover County at Gmail, because that's where I started, and I just left it alone because it's still in some of the books. So if you want to find me, you can go to Flyover County on Gmail. You can go, if you just do a search on Flyover County and my name, which you're never going to be able to spell, so just stay with Flyover County, you'll find it. If you go on Amazon and you put in Flyover County, it'll pop up. Again, that's the easiest way. I do have a Facebook page. Guess what it's called? It's Flyover County. I have a personal one, but I like to keep everything that's author-ish on Flyover County. So you can find me on Facebook. I do dabble with X, but I haven't played with it that much. I have a page called Flyover County, but I don't do much with it. I dabble with that. I have a personal Facebook page that I keep personal. Not that I won't answer an author or someone looking for something, but I try to keep the writing stuff in the writing stuff. Other than that, I think that covers it. I do have the website, which is flyovercounty.com, and that's fun to have. So you can look up flyovercounty.com, it'll pop up. If you look on Facebook, Flyover County will pop up. If you look on X, Flyover County will pop up. And I'm more than happy if somebody there we go. We have to do the 1950s version. If you're within the sound of my voice and you like to write stories and you've written a story and you don't know where to go or how to go, I will be happy to help as much as I can. I'm not going to do it for you, but I will tell you how to change the oil. I'm not going to change your oil, but I'll tell you how to change the oil. And if you want to pay somebody to change the oil, maybe I can help you with people that I consider reputable, because you have to be careful as an independent publisher. It's a wild west out there, and there are more crooks than there are honest people. And there are more people that want to take your money and give you a whole lot of nothing. I'm going to advertise your page, your book internationally. Yeah, they put a line on their website, and that only costs you $4,000. Yeah, so you got to be careful. It's the wild, wild west. You have to be careful where you go. Look at everything twice, and never, never, as an independent author, pay for someone to do something unless you've checked them out 8 ways from Sunday, because every one of them wants money.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop those links in the show notes. And again, thank you so much.
You have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you for allowing me to spend an hour with you today.